I put this as the third best Alien film ever, basically. Behind, I had Aliens as my number one and Alien as my number two.
The tension that was in Jaws and the first Jurassic Park, especially Jurassic Park. I just felt that in this film.
The production designer really and the art department team really captured that feel of an Alien movie.
What he did was, and I noticed it like maybe later part of the film, was there would be these sound effects and this conversation and all this stuff, and the music will slowly start ramping up without you even realizing that it's happening until it builds up to an intense level, and you're like, oh.
But I think there's he takes the franchise in an interesting direction, particularly with what happens in the last third. Yeah, no, I was really impressed. So you saw Alien Romulus yesterday?
Yes, yes. It was a press screening at 10 a.m. And normally when I go to a press screening, there's probably 9 people in a massive movie theater. But with this one, there was at least 70 to 80 on IMAX, and it was, well, before I say something else, what did you think of the film?
Pretty good. I think it's probably, I mean, in a strange summer where lots of films have kind of been moved around because of the actors' strike last year. So it's not been a stellar summer for blockbusters, really. I mean, I enjoyed Furiosa, for example, but yeah, this feels like the best summer blockbuster there's been. I thought someone asked me to do an article kind of ranking the Alien movies, and that includes Prometheus and Alien Covenant, the prequels, and then the Alien versus Predator spin-offs. And well, so when is this coming out, by the way? Because the embargo drops at 8 o'clock tonight, doesn't it? So
yeah, I'm literally posting it exactly at 3 p.m.
3 p.m.
Eastern,
your time. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put this as the third best Alien film ever, basically. Behind, I had Aliens as my number one and Alien as my number two, although it's very difficult to separate those two for different reasons. But I thought he did a fantastic job, Fede Álvarez. I'd seen about 20 minutes or so in advance. He'd come to London and shown some footage, so I was quite hyped to see it. I'm a big fan of at least those early Alien movies. I mean, they were seminal. And I remember coming out of that footage thinking, well, this looks pretty good. It's got the real creepy feel of those early Alien films, the kind of terrifying nature of the face huggers skittering around and things like that. I mean, they held back on a lot of stuff in that footage, obviously. But yeah, no, I was really impressed. I mean, I just wrote in a review, it reminds me a little bit of the Star Wars show, The Mandalorian, and maybe other Star Wars shows as well, but particularly that one, which kind of immerse you back into that Star Wars universe, something that feels very, very familiar. And I felt here, he really dipped you back into that Alien universe. We start really on that mining colony where the characters, we first meet Rain and Andy. And just the kind of look of that colony just reminded me of what it's like to be back in an Alien film, even though most of the Alien films are really set on spacecrafts and things. I mean, occasionally they sort of dock into a planet, but there's a slight weariness to the look of everything. Everything's just a bit worn and tired, and it's not the kind of gleaming sci-fi that you might get in, say, 2001 or something like that. And I thought the production designer really and the art department team really captured that feel of an Alien movie. And then it's, I don't think we should really go into spoilers because there's some really good spoilers in this, or good surprises, I should say. But I think there's he takes the franchise in an interesting direction, particularly with what happens in the last third. Yeah, no, I was really impressed. What about you?
Likewise, I was very, very impressed. And I haven't seen Covenant and Prometheus in a while, even though they came out just like the last 10 years. So, I mean, I remember some visuals of it and some story arc, but not that much because they were not that great films in my view. I've never seen Alien Resurrection. I don't even know that existed until like a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
But I've the very first Alien movie I ever saw was Aliens in 1991 on television, and then I saw Alien, and then I saw Alien 3 last week after a long time, which I was pleasantly surprised about. Aside from some terrible CGI, it was pretty good film. Having said all that, Alien Romulus really blew me away. Um, in terms of its storytelling, in terms of its plot twists, everything. There's the visual effects are done kind of like the old Stan Winston way. That's all I will say. And and then just the sheer production design. Even I'm trying to, aside from the intense moments, throughout the film, there's a couple of shots which are very beautiful in terms of what the universe looks like. I don't want to say it, but you probably will get a sense. And it's towards the last act. That's all I will say. And there's some shots that reminded me of 2001: Space Odyssey. Like you can literally blow it up and put it in your room if you wanted to. Like that's how beautiful some of the shots were. And yeah, Fede did an amazing job. The tension was just incredible. And I thought, how sometimes when you're watching a jump scare movie, a thriller movie, okay, now this is gonna happen. Anytime I anticipated something to happen because it wasn't happening, I was completely wrong. And that's what was so great about it. And I remember watching the trailer when it first came out. The moment I got sold to that film was when it said from the director of Don't Breathe. Because the amount of tension in Don't Breathe there, in the first half of the film is amazing, and I knew I was going in for something that was going to blow my socks away, and it certainly did. It's definitely in the top three for me. Aliens is always number one for me too, and I think Alien because it's the first one and Ridley Scott, then this one, and then David Fincher one. One thing I'll talk to you about the colony scene in the beginning. It reminded me a lot of Blade Runner, the original
Mm.
one. That feel, that environment that they created, and some of the shots. It was just the old way of filmmaking, like camera just following the characters and showing the environments. It didn't cut away to tight shots just to cheat. It was really well done. Music, production design, visual effects, everything was fantastic.
Yeah, no, the music as well. It's kind of this. It's funny. I didn't really notice it until certain points, and then it's kind of like
Yeah.
this kind of throbbing electronic score, I guess, is how you describe it. But it doesn't ever announce itself as one of these big scores, big orchestral scores that you get in kind of Hollywood movies a lot of the time. But it's just playing under the surface and kind of keeping the tension going. I mean, you mentioned the tension, and it really is a very tense film. I mean, again, I don't want to spoil the scenes too much, but I think there's a really clever sequence where they're trying to cross one part of the ship to get into another part of the ship, and they have to raise the temperature of the room so
Yep,
that
yep,
the
yep.
face huggers can't spot them because they react to temperature. So that was a really clever idea. I guess that's something we've not. I think what the script really did very well was something like that, which I guess makes you think about a face hugger in a different way than perhaps you've done in a previous Alien film. So he kind of played with the mythology without ever sort of doing something ridiculous. I mean, people will have their opinions about the ending, which we won't go into, obviously, but generally speaking, I think he touches on what not just the alien creatures and their kind of mythology and their biology, if you like, but also the Wayland Yutani Corporation and their kind of ruthless nature. We kind of know that already, but I think we see more of it here. We just see a little bit more about the company. Even I think we could say right at the beginning, Kaylee's character Rain is trying to get off that colony, that mining colony, and she supposedly has done enough hours to, to be released from this kind of servitude that she's in. And then she discovers that they've just raised the quota and she can't get off for another 5 or 6 years. And that just shows how sort of, as a small example of how ruthless that company is. Which again, we've dealt with in the past in the previous films, but I think here we see it in a different way. We've seen that company operate more on a ground level, on a wider level. So I think anyone who's a big fan of the franchise will probably appreciate seeing more of this universe expanded without it being, ridiculous or over the top or anything like that. I think it's very subtle the way he just toys with that mythology. Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. Again, you could say The Mandalorian did something similar in the Star Wars universe. It sort of dumps you back in a universe you're familiar with, but then takes you off in a sort of an adjacent tangent. I mean, I'd say if I had to pick holes in it, that I wasn't that keen on the performance. Well, it's not so much the performance, but maybe it's coming from London, but there's a character. I think he's called Bjorn, but he's played by Spike Ferns, who is the very London one who swears a great
Oh, right,
deal.
right, right.
I could have done without that swearing. I didn't think it really added anything to the film. It wasn't particularly clever. But you could argue that they're young and obviously they're in a horrifying situation. So I'd probably swear if I was in that situation. But, I could have done without that. But aside from that, I thought the performances were really good. I think her name's Eileen Wu, who plays Navarro, who's one of the sort of team that are kind of trying to heist these cryopods in the early part of the film. I thought she was great. She has a great sequence. Again, won't go into it. Too many good sequences to spoil. But I think that probably the best performance has got to come from David Johnson, who played Andy, the sort of synthetic, because he's
Couldn't agree more.
very timid in the first section. I mean, he's kind of regarded as the brother, let's say, to Rain. I mean, not an actual biological brother, but we learn that her father's rescued this android and sort of given him one directive, which is basically to look after Rain. But then things happen to him and his personality changes. And I think it's just a great performance from him. We just see two very different performances that he gives. And I really like what he did there. I think that's going to be a real breakout performance. I mean, he's known in the UK for a BBC show called Industry, which is all set in the kind of financial banking universe. But this is obviously very different, a sci-fi. And, you could rank him alongside Lance Henriksen, where he played Bishop in Aliens, and obviously Ian Holm playing Rook in the original Alien.
Right.
Yeah, he's just as good as those guys. And those guys are obviously very, very esteemed actors. So, I was really impressed by him particularly.
Yeah, he was the best thing in terms of performance. I mean, everybody else was great too. The whole swearing part, I'm glad you mentioned it because for me, it wasn't that particular, scene where he's just swearing for no reason, but I just felt, and I get it in the intensity and everything. And I also felt that in certain scenes, there was an homage given to the original films, like with some language, on purpose. And, but one of the things that I really enjoyed with the film and I don't know, this is just me being a Spielberg fan, I felt there was a little bit of, the tension that was in Jaws in the first Jurassic Park, especially Jurassic Park. I just felt that in this film. And he really took it to the next level where, again, the music part, one of the great things about the music was you said it was playing under the surface. The only time what he did was, and I noticed it like maybe later part of the film was there would be these sound effects and this conversation and all this stuff, and the music will slowly start ramping up without you even realizing that it's happening until it builds up to an intense level, and you're like, oh, and that's when you start feeling those emotions of that fear and that surprise and all that. No, it was really 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 cool. I can't wait to see it again. I'm glad I saw it in IMAX, even though it wasn't shot in IMAX cameras. I don't think it was shot in IMAX cameras. I think they enhanced it with 4K, and I could be wrong. At least that's what I read. But yeah, hands down, and probably one of the best Alien films.
Yeah, no, I mean, do you feel like, I don't know, because they're calling it like an interquel, which is a terrible phrase, but basically it's obviously coming in between Alien and Aliens. Yeah. Now, do you feel like this, a bit like, let's say, Rogue One? Now, Rogue One, the Star Wars film, obviously came before Star Wars, basically, and because it's obviously about the building of the Death Star. Right. But effectively, you could call it, coming after Star Wars Episode 3, and then, if I've got that right, I'm now trying to remember if I've got that right, but yeah, before the original Star Wars. And Rogue One is effectively a one-off movie. You can't really repeat it because spoiler alert, but some characters die. I won't say who, but in case you haven't seen it. But here it feels like we can't really repeat. It shouldn't be repeated, this idea. It's like we shouldn't have a sequel to Alien Romulus, where they have another film before Aliens. It's like a brilliant idea, and it feels like a one-off, and they shouldn't do it again. That doesn't mean it won't stop the studios doing some sort of sequel, but I just feel like he's got it so right, it doesn't need a follow-up. But do you agree?
I couldn't agree more. And I just think that one of the things that Aliens, after the second Aliens, it suffered with the whole anthology was Alien 3 wasn't received well with fans, right? And then they decided to make another one, I think, after 4 or 5 years. That didn't turn out well from what I read. I haven't seen it. Then they waited 20 years and they did Covenant and Prometheus, which wasn't received that well either, from what I understand, because for me, those films were very visually, um, it was just very much like everything was very lit up in terms of lighting, and the visual effects were very, CGI. I do think Alien Romulus is probably going to make a lot of money, and when movies make a lot of money, they have a way of, coming out with more films.
Well, you could
I,
say the
I
same
sure,
about Deadpool and Wolverine, which Ryan Reynolds just says he had never envisaged another one. Now that doesn't mean it won't happen because it's just made over $1 billion. So of course Disney will want a sequel to that in some capacity, whether it's just Deadpool returning or returning with Wolverine in some capacity. But here it just feels. I hope Fede resists doing a sequel. But that doesn't mean they couldn't bring another director in who's sort of willing to
yeah.
try. But it's funny when you mentioned Alien 3 not being well received, and it certainly wasn't. You're completely correct. And I haven't watched it for a long time. And obviously that's David Fincher making his first ever feature.
Hmm.
And yet, in the way I remember it, and when I was constructing this list yesterday, it still ended up pretty high. I think at number 4 behind Romulus, because all the others just didn't work by comparison. I mean, Alien 3 is flawed, but it's still got some extremely dark moments in it. The sort of what happens to the Ripley character at the end, for example. I won't say in case
Hmm.
people haven't seen it, but whereas those other ones, I mean, Prometheus and Alien Covenant just felt like films that were only kind of vaguely connected to the Alien universe, really, and then obviously the Alien versus Predator films were, well, I mean, I can see why they made them, just to sort of get some, generate some fan service, I guess. But neither of those were really worth your time. So yeah, I mean, Alien 3 is still, it's flawed, but it's at least interesting. But they haven't, until Alien Romulus, they haven't really produced a decent, proper Alien film probably since Cameron's movie into 1986, which is crazy when you think about it. That's whatever that is, almost, is that 40 years? Something like that. Almost 40 years.
Almost 40 years. And the thing with the first three Alien films and Romulus that stands out for me, despite their weaknesses, and flaws and everything, was either they had a good to decent to good story, or they had really memorable characters, right? So I only saw Alien Romulus once yesterday. Now, for me to remember, like I was literally before we started talking, I was trying to think about who the characters were, what happened to them, and how did it happen to them, whatever happened to them, right? And I remembered. And I will remember that because the story was strong. The characters were not Oscar worthy, but they were still pretty good, you know. But I think with Covenant and Prometheus, I don't remember anything other than some few visuals.
Well,
That's
the
it.
only thing I can remember really from those films is Michael Fassbender as
That's it.
the android David
Yeah.
in Prometheus, and then he replays that character in Covenant, and also an upgraded android as well. And he gives a great performance, I think, in both of those films. But yeah, if you look at the cast, I mean, Prometheus had like Idris Elba, Charlize Theron. I think Guy Pearce is in it. I mean, it's a great cast, and Covenant had some decent performers in it as well. But yeah, there's just not very memorable characters. I mean, the one thing I was worried about with Romulus was it is effectively people trapped on a ship, which is kind of the go-to narrative for an alien film, because obviously that was what happened in the very first one.
Yeah.
Relatively unknown cast, all trapped on this ship in the middle of space because they can't escape. So it sort of has to happen. Of course, they've always thought about putting the alien characters on Earth or something like that, which would be a disastrous idea. So in a way, you have to have that containment. But I think there was enough in Romulus that replaying that containment idea didn't really matter, because first of all, it's a brand new cast, brand new characters. So you're seeing quite a young bunch of kids really thrown into this horrifying situation they have absolutely no idea about. And then, as I sort of alluded to earlier, there's lots and lots that touches back to the original Alien film, that
Yeah.
expands on that mythology. So, yeah, I think Alien fans are going to go crazy over this movie. And like you said, I mean, it should make a lot of money, but it is coming out in the middle of August, which is never always the greatest time. It's always like often where studios put blockbusters that aren't the biggest films anymore. Normally it's June or July where they kind of go for their really bigger movies. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it will make money though. I think when the reviews come out, which I mean, the early reactions of social media have been really good, I think. So I can't see why it wouldn't make loads of money, but who knows in this strange time that we live in as far as cinemas are concerned.
I don't know if it will open big or not. That I don't know, but I do think the reviews and the word of mouth is going to extend its duration, and it's just going to make, it's going to have minor drops every week. Because I even if anybody hasn't seen any of the Alien films, which I doubt is the case, but let's assume there's a lot of people who haven't, this film stand on its own too. Like, you don't have to per se watch everything. Well, maybe, but again, at the same time, it's the
It
way
would
it's
help if
done.
you've seen the original
Yeah,
Alien, but at the
yeah,
same time, I think you're right. I think you could watch it without having seen that, and then you'd be intrigued to go back and watch that. And that's the only one you'd really need to see, because that's the only one that's preceded it effectively. Apart from, I suppose, well, there is a reference to Prometheus at one point, I think, isn't there, in the film? So
yes.
you could have seen Prometheus and Covenant as well, but you'd probably really start with Alien. I think that's where you should start.
Yeah, I actually highly recommend you watch Alien 3. I saw it last week. I did an episode on it. Aside from like few CGI terrible effects, like there was some like, great puppeteer work, but the full shots were really bad, which I think was where David Fincher and the studio had disagreements. That's just my guess, along with the other gentleman who I spoke to, Ethan, on the podcast. But have you ever seen The Mist,
The
Stephen
Frank
King?
Darabont
Yeah,
movie,
yeah.
yeah, a long time ago, but I have seen it.
But you know the entire premise of it and everything. So I was reminded of The Mist, even though Alien 3 came way before that. Just the cinematography, the texture, the art direction of the characters, and there's a priest character in Alien 3, um, which reminded me of the religious character in The Mist. So it's an interesting film. I don't know why people didn't like it. But you look back at it, aside from again visual effects, I thought it was a pretty good film. So if you have a chance on a plane or anything else, just take a look at it. It's
I mean,
pretty
I
good.
remember the overriding memory I have of it, because obviously I think a prison colony, penal colony, is quite a good setting,
Yeah,
because that does take you away from the idea of a spaceship. I mean, obviously, Aliens isn't really set on a spaceship, because they land on the planet, and
yeah,
the claustrophobia there comes from just them being trapped in this kind of, well, facility where sort of colony facility, and that works pretty well, I think, as a sort of contained space. But obviously, a prison colony works just as well as a contained space. But I had this sort of overriding memory, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you've seen it recently, of the kind of final bit where they're kind of running through all these corridors, and the camera's kind of zooming through all these corridors as they're being chased by the alien. That, to me, didn't work at all as a sequence. That's where the film really fell apart, as I remember. But again, it is a long time since I've seen it. But there are some really striking images as well, particularly, again, I won't go into it, but what happens to Ripley at the end of the film, I think it's a particularly
yeah.
striking moment. So it has its moments for sure, Alien 3.
You're right about the POV shots. I think what they try to do there was to me again, it felt like they were trying to. There are shots like that in the original Predator. I don't know if you remember, with the heat signature, and you see like the Predator chasing Arnold Schwarzenegger's character. And I felt they'd try to do that, but it didn't work because some of the shots were upside down because the alien was, crawling upside down. And it just kind of ruined that tension in the moment. So yeah, but nevertheless, it's a good film overall.
Could
Decent.
we, without spoiling it, and you may not want to do this, so just shut me down if you do, but could we allude to the AI of the film without revealing what the AI I'm talking about? A certain character, let's say. We won't name the character, but for spoiler reasons. But did you think that worked? Because that again weirdly reminded me of Rogue One, where you had Peter Cushing, his Grand Moff Tarkin character, and a young Carrie Fisher, sort of Princess Leia, being sort of reborn via AI, and we have something similar here with a certain character that fans will be familiar with. Did you think that worked for you?
Without saying what it is, but I think it did. It did. If the movie had come out 2 years ago, probably wouldn't have, because in the time and the space that we live in now, with AI being like, a topic of conversation in everyone's life, I think it did. I think it did.
Yeah, I think if we just talk from a purely technical point of view, I think
Yeah,
it was pretty good. And
character-wise too, I think.
yeah, character wise, so how they did it vocally, I'm not sure, but again, very very clever. However they did it, so I was convinced, and there was lots of shots of. I noticed when that character was first introduced, you would see shots from behind the character or from a distance. So they didn't have too many shots close up where you might start to pick holes in it. There was a lot of shots of the character on a screen or things like that. So again, the screen was quite fuzzy, so you wouldn't really, deliberately, so you wouldn't really be able to study that character too much to sort of pick holes in the AI, which I think was pretty good anyway. But they deliberately held back on too many shots so that you kind of bought it, and I think that was quite a smart piece of filmmaking.
I agree, and I think one thing that I mean nowadays anybody can, there are softwares out there. I can take your voice and take 30 seconds of it and throw it into the AI system and make you say things that you've never said or vice versa, right? So that technology is accessible. One thing which I don't understand, this was a problem in what was that Martin Scorsese movie that came out?
The Irishman.
Yeah. I have seen people on YouTube, like with $50 budget, do a better job in making them look young than a studio that spent, few, three, four, $5 million on it. So I think the technology, I don't know why some of the studios, I'm not going to talk in detail about Alien Romulus, but there is really good technology and people who execute that technology out there for decent dollars. And I just don't know why. I think I'm pretty sure after Alien Romulus comes out on DVD and everything, or even, whenever they show some scenes from it, people will take that and output a better version of that in terms of visually. So I don't know. Nevertheless, it was great. I'm just saying there were certain moments where I don't know if you noticed it. I noticed it kind of didn't look that good, and that's why they try to kind of cover it up a little bit.
Yeah, well, there were a couple of
With
moments that didn't
yeah,
quite work, but generally
yeah,
speaking, I mean, certainly, like you said, compare it to The Irishman. But that film was made now, what, sort of 3 years ago or something, and
yeah,
in that
yeah.
bracket, and probably the CGI, the AI was done a year earlier than that. So realistically, there has been quite a lot of development in the last few years, and it's getting there. Basically, I mean, it's an interesting point. It raises lots of questions. Of course, it kind of made while watching it, maybe start to think about uh, you know, the morality of doing this, of bringing back actors. I mean, they did it on Rogue One, as we talked about. I mean, that's interesting, but it is a side issue. But I think from a technical point of view, it was not quite flawless, but certainly getting there.
It was, yeah. No, again, look, visual effects can be sometimes not perfect, but if the story and the performances and the characters are decent enough, people tend to forget those things, right? And I think you pinpoint those things more when the story is weak. So anyways, great film. I highly recommend people watch it. I really hope I was Googling it yesterday. I even went on Amazon. I hope there's an Art of our Alien Romulus book that comes out because there's some breathtaking shots in there that I wish I could talk about, but I can't. But yeah, I couldn't find anything. Maybe later this year, maybe next year.
Yeah, it would be nice. I mean, I know when we saw the advanced footage, the guy doing the Q&A, moderating the Q&A with the director is a journalist called Ian Nathan, who's written a lot about the Alien films in the past. So I kind of imagine if anyone's going to be doing one, it will probably be him, but I don't know for sure if he's doing one. But yeah, it certainly merits a kind of making of book because when you get a film so right, you really want to celebrate the people behind it, not just the director, but obviously all the team behind it as well, and the cast. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack in how they made that film, and you could tell Fede is a real fan of that franchise. And he
Yeah.
wasn't, I mean, I haven't seen too many social media reactions, but one was kind of saying that, it really gets it right because it's not a film about fan service. I mean, there's obviously callbacks to the original Alien and so forth, but it's not a film that's loaded with Easter eggs in the way you'll get with a Deadpool and Wolverine movie, but that's obviously done more for comic effect, of course. But here, it's all done in service of the story. And I think that is probably why it's been why we clearly both like it and why it's a successful film.
100%. Awesome. That's great. What are you up to now? Now that we're just gonna wrap it up, are you working on anything that you don't want to talk about?
Well, I've just had a book out. Well, it was a month or so ago on the Adam Wingard film Godzilla X
All
Kong: The
right.
New Empire. That was effectively an art book. That was a little different for me because I got to speak to, well, artists, basically storyboard artists and concept artists, and that you don't normally, at least in the books I've done in the past, I haven't really had a chance to speak to those kind of guys. So, and it was funny because most of them had done their work probably years ago, and obviously the film then gets, the characters get developed and so on and so forth. So it was kind of funny. I would often do a Zoom chat with these guys and upload all their work onto the screen so they could talk me through it. And half of them had kind of forgotten what they'd done because it had been so long ago. All things had evolved and morphed and changed. So that was interesting. I had great time with Adam. He was a fantastic guy. Gave me a lot of time to get that book done. So yeah, and I am working on something now, which I can't quite talk about yet, I don't think, but huge movie. That's all I'll
I
say.
and I think I know what it is, and I won't say it either.
Okay, but we should definitely talk about it as and when it's ready to go because I'm sure you're a fan of it, and there'll be some great stories to talk about.
I can't wait for that. I really can't wait for that, and I'm really anticipating that. Even before you mentioned it, I had an idea that. But anyways, looking forward to it. Great stuff. Thank you so much, James, for your time, man. I really, really appreciate it. We'll talk more, I'm sure, in the next coming months or weeks or whatever about a specific film. So looking
Yeah,
forward to that.
always a pleasure talking to you.
Take care, James. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.